Hello and welcome to this masterclass. My name is Keith Morrison and I'll be talking to you today about strategic storytelling. It's a great pleasure to have this opportunity to engage with you through this forum. I'm looking forward to sharing some of the insights I've had from my career. Storytelling and strategic storytelling has always been something that's been valued and been appreciated, whether that's been when I've been on the agency side or whether since I've gone in-house and practiced from within a company. As I said, this is a great opportunity to be able to connect with you. My career, I currently serve as the regional marketing director for Black and Veatch in Asia Pacific, in the India subcontinent, as well as extend into Europe, Middle East and Africa and Latin America. So a pretty broad remit at this moment in time. At Black and Veatch, we have a great story to tell around sort of how we make a difference in the world of sustainability. Literally our mission statement, which I'll describe later, is building a world of difference through providing innovation and sustainable infrastructure. So we have a wonderful story that we can tell, and I've been influential in helping that be created and implemented over the years. I have worked in many markets around the world. I've worked obviously in Ireland and the UK. I started my career actually working for an agency in the UK, which was the first agency, I think, certainly in the UK market, but potentially in the world, which had a creative arm, creative planning group as part of it, the way that ad agencies had always had. And it was quite an innovative thing to do. And then really, from the very beginning of my career, I got to kind of understand the importance of planning and the importance of adding sort of authenticity and creativity into how you tell your story. Later in my career, I've worked, with Kia Motors, for example, based out of Korea, and their sort of reputation building and their storytelling was all about really trying to correct the narrative. So about shifting brand perceptions. They had what, at the time when I was working there, what you'd call the Korea discount. Really had to work on their brand, and the quality of their products was really good, but the perceptions weren't there. I worked with Repack, for example. Repack, an Irish recycling body. And that was a great example of how we're able to tell really creative stories that actually influenced people's behaviors. So, for example, one Christmas, we told this great story, lots of data crunching. I remember spending, up till midnight one night crunching all this data about how much calculating how much if you recycled your bottles and your waste and your cardboard boxes from Christmas, that actually you could save. The average household could save the equivalent of buying an iPod. This was back in the early 2000s. That got front page coverage. We used lots of interesting visuals, to get some pictures into the media. Was suited for broadcast. There was lots and lots of great coverage that we got just from that sort of that planning and creative processing that created an impact. Worked with Microsoft as well, and they're famed certainly in the public relations world for their top story mechanic, their which is very much, I would say, based on sort of the Barcelona principles around measurement, that you really plan accurately what you want to get, you target the top tier places and the ingredients that you want in that story to appear in the press. So I've had quite a lot of sort of experience in this area, and it's really this session is by no means going to be comprehensive. I wouldn't claim to suggest this is the only way you can go about it, but I do hope I can share with you, some practical tips, some insights into, we'll frame this around, let's say, sustainability as a new area where you could tell stories. It's a very, very broad area, and I think a very fertile area for any communications practitioner and a business practitioner, marketing practitioner to be understanding and continually improving how they do it. If you look at the role of, actually before I go into it, but I think what I'll talk about today, I'll look at the role of communications as I see it, certainly. I look at external communications today and the importance of planning, external communications today and the importance of collaboration. We'll look at strategic storytelling, and I think we'll look at it from a number of different angles. We'll look at it from let's say your core message or brand really, right? So that very high, very kind of conceptual storytelling, so to speak, will then move into an area around narrative shaping and narrative management, which is increasingly important, particularly when you take the long view on these things. And then we will spend a little bit of time. This isn't really about storytelling and how to tell your story. It's really the strategy behind it, but we will spend a little bit of time talking about story patterns, and I think and story structures. Before, obviously, we'll talk about measurement. Data is a very important part of this whole picture, particularly in today's world, and we should be using that more effectively and more comprehensively in how we do communications. So the role of communications, as I see it, I try and keep things fairly simple. It's not that difficult. I think if you keep things simple, then you can layer complexity on top rather than starting from something more complicated. It gets harder to then perform, right? So the first thing in communications is you really got to know your audience. Absolutely fundamental to anything you do. Who are you trying to talk to? Why are you trying to talk to that person? That has to be really clear. You really have to then, you have to have that sort of planning ethic in everything you do. There's always a risk in communications. You become, let's say, an order taker, a reactionary function within the business that, you're waiting for something to happen in the business and then you communicate it. Whereas really you need to be, proactively building your reputation, thinking about ways in which you can get that positive message out and construct and engage in the narrative, which we'll talk about later. Through what the third point really, so know your audience, plan really well, be on that front foot, but then also deliver, communications that is, that resonates and is authentic. And a lot of the time, again, looking at it simply, I remember one place in my career when my colleagues talking about, well, here they seem to just go about it like, fire, aim, ready, rather than, the classic metaphor around, or the classic, process for shooting a gun, which obviously is I think I want to be promoting, but, shooting a gun, ready, aim, fire. It's very simple. Know your audience, plan it well, and deliver, brilliance, essentially, right, through your execution that's authentic and is brilliant. And, the role of comms very much, I think, you are that, or that your function is that bridge between internal and external, particularly when we're talking about external communications really in this masterclass. You have to serve as almost that filter. A lot of the time in the past, when I started my career, a lot of communications based around public relations and media relations and very much the filter, and that you sometimes relied, or there was a risk of relying too much on the filter being the journalist. I learned over time that if I did the filtering on behalf of the journalist before it got to the journalist, it made the journalist's life a lot easier, particularly when resources were constraining. So I've kind of built up that sort of bridge and filter aspect that's really important in the role today. And if you do look at the role today, and we move on a little bit in terms of, let's say, the section on external communications and planning, right? Your team, your function is, let's say, it's the engine, right? It's very much, let's say, the human resources that make the communications come to life, that bring the communications, pull it from the organization and tell it to your audiences, to the external environment. But really, before you that's your function, but you've got sort of data almost. Think of the engine in the middle and data on either side of you. The planning process, critical for communications and strategic communications, strategic storytelling. You've got to be that planning's got to be data informed, right? I don't just mean that we've got a lot of sort of quantitative data, but also qualitative data is incredibly important to be bringing into that. You go back to the first thing you tell a new intern or a new member of your team who's just joined the public relations sector, right? Or a journalist, right? Or whatever it happens to be. You got to read. You got to know your subject matter, and that is an anchor in terms of how you approach communications. And when you talk about data, right, the different sources of data, you've got the first thing that when you start out planning, an integrated campaign, it's the strategic data, it's the strategic business data, it's the classic, what is the business trying to achieve? What are the business objectives here? It's really looking at what's profitable, right? See, if you can get a handle on, the business lines or the products, or sometimes if you're not working for a commercial organization, those really, the issues that are going to move the needle. you really have to, you really should be looking at that. What's the rising momentum, profitable momentum within the business? What's going to happen? So your communications plan has to speak back, has to echo that strategy. And then that's sort of really the market data, or market and strategic data. You've then got marketing data as well that you need to be, rolling into your planning. This is all about how do you, prioritize channels. Pardon me. How do you make sure that what you are doing is effective? How do you plan to do things that are effective? Learning lessons from your own activities in the past and bringing that back into your planning. I do think that no organization is brilliant at everything. No team is brilliant at everything. There are times where I think I've certainly looked at my career where we're really good at storytelling through video, right? So let's prioritize some of that and let's see how we can make that work. We get great engagement through video storytelling, right? Like one of the things we learned, was this is a good few years ago, before the advent of TikTok, right? So 30-second videos or shorter videos, there was this 90-second cliff. Let's make sure we don't have these videos going longer than that. Obviously now our videos are a lot tighter than that even. So you've got the strategic data, you've got the marketing data, you've got the sales data, right? The customer insights, right? That's another thing you need to be bringing, where your audience insights, your stakeholder insights, who you're trying to influence. This could be like brand surveys as well as additional sort of just data from your sales team. You got to understand the issue pain points, or the pain points of the customer. Like what is it that they're really looking to listen to, and what are they willing to receive from your communications. And then the final sort of data set, which is I call it the social data set. I don't want to get that confused with social media, but just the social data that's happening and really understanding the zeitgeist. This has always been a real strength of the good public relations performer. He kind of that sense, knowing what's out there. And that goes back to what I was saying about read, know your business, know what goes beyond just your business, how it connects. Remember, you're that bridge in your function between the internal sort of realities and the external realities. You have to bridge those as a communications professional. Move on, I think, into that data, like critically important for forming planning. We look at the sort of external communications and let's say the importance of collaboration, right? So we're moving on to this next section, the importance of collaboration. If you look at that, when I talked earlier about you have the hub, right? You have you are the engine, and then you have the data informing that planning, and then data for measurement, which we'll talk about later. So you are that hub. That's really what it's not a fancy word, but you're really an integrated content distribution ecosystem. There's depending on where you are and which organization you are, there's lots of different ways you can structure comms. Comms can be rolled up into different reporting lines and so on. But ultimately, you have to collaborate with a lot of different functions or complementary functions that are going to be within your team, or just your neighbors, so to speak, across marketing, sales, internal communications, or employee communications, HR, if that's not part of your group as well. There's a variety of different people to engage with. You've got essentially, you've got the classic sort of communications, public relations sort of function of that in terms of media relations, which is a dying art and incredibly important, incredibly potentially impactful for your organization if you do it right. But you've also got the writing. You've also got that writing skills and those writers who can develop content for sort of like news content, or publishable content, so to speak, as well as as you go down into different types of writing that can be planned and implemented. Writing for video, writing for adverts, copywriting, creative writing, other skills there. So you've all those people you need to be collaborating, engaging with, and making sure you're aligned with. Then you've got the social media team, increasingly a domain within marketing. It's not just a domain within communications. Increasingly important to HR, right? Think of things like LinkedIn. That's the voice of your brand for recruiting and now more in terms of sales and expanding your leads and lead sources. There's a lot of stuff you can be doing in social media. So social media is part of it. You've got events. You've got events that are going across digital and in-person events. You've got presentations that need to be carrying that same message. You need to be communicating across, and a variety of other sort of sales enablement aspects that, depending on your business, you'll be involved in. You've got the graphics team to be engaging with, the importance of visual storytelling. You've got the video team, how important it is to be engaging with your video team, if that's in-house or externally, and making sure that the same message is being woven through those as well for consistency and impact. You've got your email team, email communications. It can be difficult. It's but something that's critically important if you're doing sort of lead generation activities. Email is still the way we mostly connect. It could be through other, let's say, automated communication platforms rather than just email, and how that syncs into your CRM system. Then again, that's your intelligence. If you're using that CRM system properly, that's your customer intelligence, your customer pain points I talked about earlier. You've got the web team, you've even got podcasts now. So you've got a huge kaleidoscope, this huge ecosystem of people you need to be engaging with. So that data needs to be, obviously planned and integrated your thinking, and as well in the planning stage, you need to be thinking about that collaboration and how that then will smoothly go through execution. So you're all rowing in the same direction. And so that's sort of if I move a little bit now, I think into the sort of from like the importance of planning, but into sort of the actual strategic storytelling and the different ways to go about it. And I will put a bit of a frame around, let's say, sustainability on this section, and because the reason I believe it's a good anchor for us to frame around is obviously it's a fertile new area for some people. It's a lot of change happening. It's incredibly impactful in terms of retention, in terms of your brand. So it is a if you haven't if you want to test drive some of this thinking, you could potentially apply it to that area. And you really have got I think in terms of that sustainability, you can talk around sort of, let's say, your core message, your brand story, right? I think that's an important aspect to making sure that your brand is aligned with your sustainability. I think it's really important from a purpose point of view and from an authenticity point of view that's right first. So if you may be in a situation where that's already set, and that may be already accurately set, if that's the right word. But if it's not, it's an area you need to be working on from a brand point of view, or from a mission, vision, value point of view, and from a sort of programmatic sustainability point of view. That has to be right first. Then you've got the narrative. What's the narrative you're going to plug into? Like, where do you play in the world, right? We'll talk a little bit about that. And then, maybe some structures and patterns we can do around storytelling. So why now in terms of sustainability? Just for a little bit of background, I'm assuming most people here are fairly educated around this area, but really since 2017, there was a major change in let's say the sustainability space. The formation of Sustainable Development Goals. They were founded on the universality principle. In other words, everyone has a stake in this, right? And it was no longer just the domain or just the accountable responsibility of governments and NGOs to make the world a better place. Businesses, very much had to be part of that, and it wasn't good. The acknowledgement that we won't change the world if commercial interests aren't aligned and commercialist interests aren't driving it. And it pretty much gave that permission for businesses to essentially make a profit out of sustainability. There shouldn't be anything wrong with the word profit, but as long as an organization is geared towards Sustainable Development Goals themselves, is doing the right things, is on that right journey, there's a huge business opportunity there. I mentioned also the retention aspect that's part of doing a sort of sustainable program and communicating that effectively. Fast forward a couple of years later, you got the CEO roundtable saying that the purpose of a business is to create value not just for your shareholders, which is the old Friedman view, but for your stakeholders. So we have this massive change where this is important for businesses. This is the direction we're all going in. We got to be telling we got to be gearing our business this way and measuring our business this way. And as a result, you've, as a communications practitioner, you've got to be sort of extending that, whether that's sustainability from an environmental point of view and from like a social or governance point of view. I'm going to probably focus a little bit more on the environmental side as we go through this, given my current company back in Veatch. So beyond, let's say, the programmatic aspect of sustainability and the sustainability program, and let's say that the compliance aspect and reporting, there's still very much a role for, even just a very tactical role for you as a communicator to be making sure that sustainability report is communicated in the right way. But that's what I'm not going to focus on. I want to focus more on the construction and the planning and the strategic planning around that. So if I look at Black and Veatch, we were, I go back to when we started this journey, let's say equivalent 5 years ago or so, we were, Black and Veatch is an engineering construction company, right? We've done some amazing work where we have changed the lives, improved the lives of millions of people, both in developing countries and in developed countries, whether that's through building, power plants or building, cleaning their water and water treatment, water conveyance and all that aspect, or building up telecommunication systems across the United States, even building electric vehicle charging stations throughout the United States, these kind of things, which improve the lives of people. But there is a very kind of clear aspect to that we build coal plants, right? And I'll get back to that in a second too. But there was a fundamental change in the technology, and as well as that's this general sort of SDG, let's think 2017 shift, whereby if you're a large commercial organization, let's just pick Microsoft or one of those companies who went out there very early on and made some very, very strong commitments to net zero and even net negative commitments as well. As a commercial organization, you have now got the ability with technology to produce and generate your own electricity and to do that sustainably, to do that with minimal carbon impacts or less carbon impacts. So we had noticed, as an organization, we typically would sell to large utilities, to large developers, but now this new audience, this new commercial audience who are looking to build sustainability. This is a sustainable infrastructure. This is a huge opportunity for Black and Veatch. And so we looked at our sustainability program, and we looked at then the communication of those efforts. There is a lot of time, sort of, let's say, plotting or understanding the narrative you're entering, because it's a new audience, because it's a new space. You've got to understand the narrative that's out there. Now, no narrative is ever owned by anyone, right? There's a difference. Let's say the narrative is what sits above your story, right? The narrative is kind of it kind of ties it together, adds deeper meaning to the story. And the stories then fit underneath it. But likewise, when you can tell your own story, but never really own it, right? There's other characters, other people, other perspectives always involved. It's the same with the narrative. And so before you really strategically jump into the new energy space, right, is where we were going, the new energy space. You've got to understand the different narratives that are taking place. And so we spent a lot of time understanding, who is saying what and where, right? So even if you look within that new energy space back then, you had people talking about energy innovation, right? There's that line, a lot of tech companies or OEM manufacturing companies who are building equipment who are talking about that. And you had the energy transition itself, so how do you actually do it? You had even part of that, or even separately, the cost of change, right? The economics around it. You could look at it from the sort of the climate crisis point of view, right? Which has a different sort of narrative and a different tone that you need to be aware of. What the future looks like, so kind of that sort of optimistic looking into how things are. So you had this new energy. It's not simple. You've got to understand that you have these different narratives that are happening within this space, and then you have different characters. You've got like the signalers who are coming out, signalers, including media people. Even just think of new Bloomberg New Energy, right? It was a new publication that came out around that time. We were looking at this. Policymakers having their own sort of, they're another character involved in this. The first movers, right? The people who wanted to kind of show that they were, the guys getting investment and guys doing all these crazy new great things, right? And then you have laggards as well at the opposite end of that spectrum. So you really have to understand that, though that narrative as a whole, and know where you play, so and then plan to enter that in the right way. And then if you look at the sort of that and sort of make sure you've managed that narrative over time and you're consistent with it as well. So you can kind of create some sort of guardrails for you to advance. But then you look into kind of storytelling, right, and story structures. I think there's obviously the classic way of telling a story, beginning, middle, end. There are other ways in which you can sort of execute your story, right? You can point instant conclusion, right? It's a kind of something that you'll see a lot, say, on a TED format, that sort of that approach. I'll give you an example off the top of my head. Point, right? The world has changed dramatically for Roger the Rabbit, right? One day, Roger Rabbit was knocked over by a train. He was trying to get on the other side to see the carrots, but hadn't noticed the development that had happened all around him, and so had ran without looking and got knocked over by the train, right? That's a different way of structuring your story, right? So lots of little kind of techniques like that. And this isn't a session for that, but it is something to bear in mind. And as you're telling your story, one thing I want to underline is the importance of talent and the importance. I think everyone can be creative, and I think everyone does have their own voice, and you should be encouraging that in your team. You should be developing that in your team. But then when you do find those nuggets of people who are brilliant at telling a story in different formats, it could be the wonderful ad copywriter, it could be the video person who'll tell a story via video, they just get it, and hold on to those people, nurture them, and hold on to those people, and they're going to make your communications brilliant. Because as well, and then you as that role is to ensure that I think if you're not that creative person, you make sure that everything's authentic, everything's on brand, everything is credible to the reader. And again, make sure you are incorporating that outside view. You may not even be able to do that all the time. You may want to bring in agencies to make sure that that filter is happening when you're telling your story, and it's not too internally sort of generated, so to speak. It has to resonate in the real world. And then finally, about storytelling, make sure and be conscious always about tension. This is a hard thing. You go back to the Black and Veatch story around our sustainable journey, right? As I said, we were involved in the coal industry. We've built very good coal facilities, very efficient coal facilities, but they do pollute, right? And it was we've acknowledged that, and one of the first movers major movers to stop and commit to not build new coal facilities when we devised our new mission statement, and we devised our new sustainability communications program, or sustainability program, I should say. We left hundreds of millions of dollars on the table and said, okay, we won't do this. This is one of our key commitments, and I think that's a good position. But it's that tension of we weren't always perfect, but we now acknowledge it. We've now moved on. That's an important thing to be telling in your stories, and it's quite powerful if you tell it in the right way to the right audiences at the right time. Other areas to think about is your arcs, right? Again, there's lots of stuff on the internet about heroes' journeys and all that, and I'm not a huge fan of it, but we structured our sort of narrative that we were going to bring into the world around into the new energy space around what was it again? The quest, right? So the idea that group of people come together to attain something, to get the treasure, right? The quest, and through a series of face a series of obstacles along the way, eventually attain it, and everyone's happy, right? It's a classic kind of Lord of the Rings type, story, right? That as a consultant, as an engineering partner, as a construction partner, we would help people on that sort of journey. We were the mentor in that journey, right? And that's the position we take in how we shaped our narrative and how we introduced ourselves to these new commercial audiences within the new energy space. But there's other different sort of story arcs that you could integrate into your narrative shaping. Overcoming the monster, classic challenger brand thing, the rags to riches entrepreneurial story. You've got a couple of things like the voyage and return, or the rebirth story. They're kind of good if you're totally changing your organization into something new, that transformation story. You've also got tragedy and comedy, like the bizarre solution, right? That's very much like a tech story as well. So there are ways in which you can use these classic intuitive emotional sort of story connection arcs, integrate that into your narrative and how you shape that, and then how you then bring that into the marketplace. There's also to be conscious of, and again, it's something that I think I give credit to. I came across a Lin PR, so around the Ukraine war and misinformation around Russia and so on, and the idea of how you can sort of plan out counter narratives, so anticipate what the narratives are going to be, and prepare to tell your counter narrative if you're in sort of that information tension or information war, so to speak. That's something to be considering as well, and it's again, you talk about narrative shaping and narrative management. It is important, particularly if you're thinking about reputation management. And so you've got then sort of outside of sort of you understand your narrative, so where it is in the world, you start plotting it out. How do you tell that story, and then implementing it is sort of that next point. So as I said, we did that sort of quest narrative, how we framed it. We talked very much. We didn't want to be. We had a difficulty in that. So we had this new audience, but we also had our core business where there were a lot of major utilities who where, had, facilities that were emitting, would be large emitters of carbon, right, or carbon dioxide, I should say. With their investments for 30 years, they may have made a decision 20 years ago for that facility, right? It's still working and so on, and from their perspective, and how do they change, right? So we had to make sure we bring those along with our message as well. So we had to balance that. We had to talk really, we had to emphasize very much the journey. And as I mentioned, we were the wise mentor in that journey, to make sure that we could have that one message. Because externally, right, you can't be saying you can't hide your messages, right? You have to have the same message that's suitable for one audience here, but then if it's read by this audience, it's not going to alienate them as well, right? And that's just, again, finding that right authentic message. So talking about, we were the wise mentor, we could help you on this journey, and accelerate, we can help you improve your progress, accelerate you on that journey to net zero, help you make good decisions, right? So this idea of like good decisions being something that, could be applicable to both of those audience sets. How do you move forward? How do you create momentum? How do you do it better? And we can help you do it better. That was very much the narrative we started to shape. And, we put that through an elevator pitch. We had, our narrative was then built out a little bit more. We had story houses, and then, stories by campaign is where you start making, where it gets creative. And so there's stories by campaign with different audiences, different time when it's told, new inputs that come along the way. Very much, that whole picture of the whole, so if you think about it, the whole sort of, from the brand aspect, which we did look at as well, I mentioned earlier, we did change our mission statement from what was originally building world of difference, of improving people's lives essentially, to building world of difference through sustainable infrastructure, and making sure we were saying sustainable infrastructure. We then looked also at, and that the brand at that same time, and it was in conjunction with a brand refresh, introducing colors, right? So acknowledging, again, we're thinking about that integrate, how do you implement it, how you tell it through different mediums, how you tell it through all those different partners, that ecosystem content distribution ecosystem we talked about earlier. We introduced new colors. We wanted to inject a sense of energy, right? I talked about that acceleration to net zero, right? The new possibilities, optimism, right? We wanted to get those feelings, those emotions into our storytelling, both through the language we were using, but also the colors and palette that we were using as well. And that was something that I'm quite proud of, that we managed to do first time for a very sort of staid, sensible engineering company, got them to really start thinking in that way, and we're moving in a great direction in terms of how we visually tell our story. And then you sort of, finally, you've managed to consider all the different parts, all the different audiences, all the different campaigns. It's rolling out. You're in this lovely ecosystem of things happening. Final point, right? The important role of external communications and measurement. I did touch on Microsoft and their planning process around their top story mechanic. I think it's top story mechanic, but the big planning for major stories in the external environment. That was sort of based on the Barcelona principles as well. I think with data, a lot of monitoring companies, I've spoken to a number of them and worked with some of them that are able to provide a great service in terms of measuring share of voice versus competitors, and training an algorithm within your measurement system to track these things versus what your competitors are saying. So what I mean by that is, so very important was this new energy, the new energy narrative. How are we engaging? We decided to talk about the energy transition, for example, right? How are we engaging that sub-narrative, right? How are we engaging the market, and how many times are we mentioned, and what publications are we mentioned, versus our competitors? And the keywords that build up for that theme, right? You can gear your social media and your sort of mainstream media measurement tool platforms to look at that, so that, for example, and what we do is we have, say, 9 competitors, Black and Veatch versus 5 competitors or 9 competitors, whatever happens to be, and look at in terms of what's our share of voice versus these key competitors when it comes to the energy transition. What's our share of voice with key competitors when it comes to how we define, let's say, hydrogen, maybe it's a little bit more getting more into the weeds. And you're really able to figure out that, or get a good sense that, hey, I remember one competitor, how are they so far ahead in terms of a few years ago, in terms of telling this, around, say it's renewables, right? How are they able to do that? Sometimes you discover things like, okay, well, it's because they've had a crisis even, right? Or it's because they just have a really good campaign, right? You look at that campaign, you can learn from it. So it's really important that you tie together that data. You mentioned the content distribution ecosystem, right? Also things like, the decisions people make as a result of your content, right? Are they downloading the ebook? Are they coming into your nurture chain in terms of developing leads? How you're working with marketing to make sure that's also functioning in the right way. That's incredibly important in terms, that's the final part. And you have to, the planning, that I can't emphasize enough that the planning aspect and bringing data into the planning process, using data at the end, and finding that competitive share of voice is very much that exec measurement. You also have all the engagement measurements. We talk about marketing data, making sure that you're using the right channels effectively. That is there, but you do need to be able to present up the chain clearly and succinctly what you're doing is working or is not working, and then this is how we're going to improve it, right, as a result of that. This is what we've learned. That's critical in terms of strategic storytelling, and it's a huge area. I hope what I've shared today is informative and provides a good picture in terms of areas where you can learn more about, explore further, ask questions to your colleagues. I would encourage you. I'm also Asia Pacific. I'm also president of the Asia Pacific Association of Communications Directors. It's very important you connect with your peers, you learn from your peers, particularly in our industry. I would encourage you to look us up, apacd.com. Consider joining, consider sharing your own knowledge as I am, be an advocate for our profession. Budgets are always an issue. You always got to fight so much integration, so much blending of functions. You got to, the pandemic was good for us in terms of underlining our value in difficult times, but you got to keep doing that. You got to keep making yourself relevant. You got to keep understanding what the needs are of your leaders and your organizations and the leaders of those different functions. So thank you for listening to me. It's been a pleasure. I hope you've learned a little bit about my views on the role of communications and external communications in terms of planning, in terms of collaboration, in terms of how to shape and manage your narrative, how you can tell your story in different ways, and tell your story in brilliant ways and authentic ways, and eventually how you measure. Thank you for your time today, and good luck with the rest of your career.